Today's mini lecture is looking at our entry into analysis of literature. So this worksheet has been prepared. We're going to go through it step by step, and then we'll take a look at a poem which I just finished writing. And this video will probably end up being two parts because the description of the terms and ideas will probably take about 10 to 12 minutes. Then I'll stop. We'll start again, we'll look at the poem that I've written, and we'll discuss how we can use these terms and definitions to analyze the ideas, concepts, and images that we find within the poem. Okay, so as you can see here, this is our focus today, which is analyzing literature. So I'm just going to jump right into the worksheet. When reading literature, it is helpful to build a framework to analyze the contents. In this lesson, we will establish the beginnings of a framework for analyzing poetry. Now, I should mention that what we're starting with today will be very useful throughout the entire semester. We look at poetry, then we'll move into short stories, then our novel, and finally the play. But this framework, this literary analysis framework that we're going to start building today, can actually be used for all of those different types of literature. So hopefully it will be something that we become familiar with. Okay, so the chart below establishes three windows or three levels to investigate literary text. So if we move on, we can take a look at this first column. These are the three different focal areas, or we're kind of separating literature. We're kind of categorizing the different components that we find within literature, and that's useful to do with any type of analysis, whether you're doing an analysis for a business class or for a science class, for a computer science class, for a political science class. If you can look at the concepts and section them into kind of categories, this will give you a framework to work with. So I've given some terms here to set up these different levels. So we've got what I call the beta window, or the beta level, or the structural window. I use all three of those terms interchangeably. Then in terms of our focus area, obviously this will be looking at structural elements or structural parts of the literature that we're investigating. Then specifically, there are some vocabulary that will help us to talk about the structures of the poems. So we've got stanzas, lines, beats per lines, the rhyme scheme, couplets, and the concept or idea or technique of refrain. Next, we've got the alpha window. Now, all of these terms, we will define them a little bit more specifically in a second. So we will get into the details. So this is just a framework to kind of set up the areas. So that's the beta window. Next, we move into the alpha window, or the alpha level. I also sometimes call that the comparative window or the comparative level, because you're looking for language tools, or we also could call it the word play level. Let's just type that in there, because that's also a useful synonym. And in terms of wordplay, we're talking about imagery. We're talking about how the writer or poet will cleverly clump together certain ideas or words because they have the first letter that is the same, or they have a rhyming vowel sound within the line. But we call it the comparative level, or we could also call it imagery driven language. Now, here are some of the specific tools. We've got similes, metaphors, personification. Those three are the comparisons. So we'll talk about that in a second. And then we've got alliteration, assonance, and anaphora. And these three are more kind of the wordplay pieces. And in terms of wordplay, I'm talking about like, is the writer or the poet clever enough to put words together that sound good together? Often we'll see this even if you were to look at like rap as a type of literature, and I do consider rap to be a type of literature because there's such skill in the way that the lyricists or the rappers put the words together that kind of fit together, that rhyme, that have the same sound at the beginning of the word. Those are all poetic devices. Those are all poetic methods that rappers are using. Okay, good. Let's keep going here. So then we move into our final window. This is what we call the theta window. We could call it the theta level, or the thematic window or thematic level. So here we look at bigger picture ideas, kind of connections, things that cross over between different major concepts or ideas of mythology, that are injected into poems, or just big ideas of the time, right? So if you're looking at poetry from the 18th and 19th centuries, there's ideas that come in terms of like revolution, or and like that's both the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution. This kind of idea of a war between industry and nature, or also there's a lot of literature that injects ideas from the Bible or from Greek mythology. So these are all bigger picture ideas, thematic ideas that are really important. So we could call this the thematic elements, or core conceptual focal points, or foci is the plural of that word. And we can definitely see that there's some big ideas over here. We've got major themes, connections to other literary works. We've got mythological crossover, biblical references. In more modern poetry, you could even talk about pop cultural references. And then I've got one specific Latin term. I like to bring some Latin terms into my literature class because Latin is part of literature. It's like the base layer, the foundational layer of a lot of poets actually learned Latin themselves when they went to university. So we can see these ideas bleeding into their work. And the first term we're going to talk about is this idea of carpe diem. And of course, we could have a pop culture reference right here. If you've watched the wonderful movie with Robin Williams in it, The Dead Poet Society, this idea of carpe diem comes into the movie through his class and through his teaching. And I actually really like that movie because it shows how literature can inject life into students, and I think it's a wonderfully done movie as well. Okay, so that's our third and final window, the theta level. Now let's move on to some of these specific definitions. So again, we're trying to keep ourselves in order. So we're just going to read through these. You're going to be expected to know these, so you can make study cards for these concepts. So first, the beta level tools. We've got stanzas. A stanza is a paragraph-like structure within a poem, and most poems will have more than one stanza. There are also some classic forms of poems, like a sonnet, for example. A sonnet has three core groupings of stanzas within it, and then a couplet at the end. Next, lines. So a line, this refers to a single sentence or one group of words together in a line. So there will be a number. Usually you'll see poems will have a number like 5, 10, 15 that is spaced on the right hand side of where the poem is written, and that's telling you this is the 5th line, this is the 10th line. They won't put down a marker for every single line, but usually at a regular interval it tells you what the line number is. And this is useful because you can count down. You can see, in the 5th line I found a powerful metaphor. So during your analysis you can use the line count to help you organize your ideas. Number 3, beats per line. So we're still in the beta level of our tools here, or the beta level of our analysis. Beats per line. So when we're looking at each individual poem, we want to count how many syllables are in each of the lines, because poets will often try to organize their poems to have the same number of syllables within each line. So we call this the beats per line. Now, iambic pentameter is a classic structure used by many poets, and pentameter means that there are 10 counts within that line. Iambic means that there's a certain rhythm, kind of like a soft, strong, soft, strong, soft, strong, but we're not going to get into those deep details of rhythm. We'll just count the syllables of each line. Number 4, rhyme scheme. This is a really important one. As you know from reading like a Dr. Seuss book, for example, often poets will have words at the end of each line that have a certain rhyming pattern. So we'll be trying to track this as well. When the last word of certain lines within a poem rhyme with other lines, this is called the rhyme scheme. And we use the letters of the alphabet to track the rhyme scheme. So we'll look at this in our analysis, how to do this. A classic type of rhyme scheme might be A, B, B. So that would be the first 2 lines have words at the end that rhyme. They have this like night and bright. And then the second 2 lines, or the second couplet, have a different word. So like dog and log. That would be an example. And quite often you'll see this like this. It'll be A, A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, E, F, F. That's one type of pattern. Or you might see something different. You might see A, B, A, B, and then C, D, C, D, E, F, E, E, F. And just that would mean that the words alternate. So like line 1 and line 3, at the end the words rhyme. Line 2 and line 4, at the end they rhyme. But don't worry if that's not clear yet, because it will become more clear once we actually move into our analysis phase. Keeping going, we're going to keep on pushing on. So couplet. This is a pairing of two lines within a poem. So often two lines will act as one idea or thought. So like you have one line, and then the second line is almost like an answer, or it completes the idea. And quite often they're paired together because they also have some sort of a rhyming relationship as well. Number 6, for our beta level literary devices or our beta level literary tools, is the idea of refrain. And refrain is when a single is when the poet repeats a group of words in more than one line. So you'll see this, that quite often it's used to create what I call a ripple effect throughout the poem. And this can be powerful because it creates this repetition, and it can create a circular effect. Like if you have at the beginning of the poem you have a line with a certain set of words, and then at the end of the poem you have the same combination of words, or they might change one of the words to drive home an impact or a message. Okay, good. So we'll see that again more specifically when we move into looking at and analyzing poems.